Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Doug Thompson podcast. A couple minutes late, but this morning I'm joined by Mark Villareal. I think I got that last name right. Did I?
I think you did really well.
So I grew up with a lot of them in my hometown, so I hope I got that correctly. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Doug, I'm a business coach, really heavy on leadership, for organizations, small and large. And I also write books. I have 8 books on Amazon that really helps me tell stories. And, my big purpose is to help affect people and help them to grow.
I mean, if you're writing that many books, and obviously you're a really good storyteller. So what were some of the ideas that made you come up with for a book? How do you sort of go through, I keep saying I've got a book running around in my head, but how do you sort of come up with that and conceptualize that?
Well, it's funny because I always would say, I think I have a book in me. I've always liked reading. I'm a big John Maxwell fan, and I tell stories about the 1 Minute Manager, Ken Blanchard, as well. And,
Mhm.
and with being heavy in leadership, one of the things I teach when I work with leaders is that great leaders tell stories. It's a
Mhm.
great way to get a point across for people to conceptualize, and sometimes it helps the epiphany in their head go off. And so when I formalized my first book, I said, I think I got a good story to tell. And most of my books are storytelling.
Mhm.
My first book is about culture and how to build that in an organization. It's called Shortcuts Get You Lost, and how, John Maxwell says leadership in one word is influence. So how that leader in the book influences the others to want to do the same what he does. He doesn't demand that they do, but because people hunger for leadership, by his leadership, he had that influence. And I still tell it in a story on how he did it, on how he made sure that he was authentic and genuine, and how to do that in a leader. That I think the stories help people grasp it.
I think, and I like your example of pointing to somebody, a character and stuff that's done this, and then sort of telling their story or telling how it's impactful or important for your audience. Because I'm sure when you wrote the book, did you have a specific persona in mind? Who was your audience for that?
Well, yeah, I did. I wrote it in the format. It's funny because I talk about the 1 Minute Manager. So that's how I wrote my first book, somewhat in a format on telling a story. And
Hmm.
it was for the story was, I would say, for not only young leaders, but those that are gravitating from being a manager, that they have to grow into a leader. And there is a difference between a manager and a leader. And,
Hmm.
and some people have to realize what those differences are, instead of or else they become stagnant. And we want people to hunger to grow. And
Hmm.
so that was a big part of the audience. And so, it's also for more mature leaders, but it's great. We wrote it so it'd be a great tool for more mature leaders than to help those that they're building into leadership grow as well.
Hmm. So, and again, so that's a great way to sort of dissect that. Is in my role in sales, I'm constantly telling stories because I sell technology and
Yep.
constantly telling stories to the typically you used to in sales, tech sales, it was about speeds and feeds.
Right.
This is faster, this is that. And now the buyers don't really care. They don't know about technology, don't really care about it. They're subject matter experts in their domain and they want to know how it's going to solve their problem. So being able to get in their mind, and it sounds like what you did is as a mature leader, well, not that you're old, but as a mature, you've been leading for a while. You have that mindset and you're sort of dissecting, okay, what's important for, if I didn't know all that I did, how would I get to where I am? Is that sort of the thought process you had?
Yeah, that is the process. We teach, like I say, I teach when I do leadership workshops, that as a young leader, sometimes you want to become a good storyteller. And it's like, yeah, but I haven't been in this too long. I'm like, well, learn stories from other people, utilize the stories of others. And then
Mhm.
as you grow, you'll have your own as well. And you gave a
Yeah.
great example on sales. Now, I was in technology 21 years. So, so when you said that, and a lot of salespeople, they want to talk about features, advantages, benefits,
Mhm.
and they have that in their head. So I always
Yeah.
say, listening is the number one human weakness, and especially salespeople fit that
Mhm.
category that we have to work on. The ability to listen and trust that then you can respond based on your skills, but they have to understand how it benefits whom they are speaking to.
Right.
And that's where the stories, even in that industry and in sales, become very impactful.
Yeah, I like how because I say my best stories I've stolen from somebody else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
But I've repurposed them and I've lived them.
Right.
And sometimes when I tell a story to a customer, I use the customer that I'm talking about is an aggregation of a bunch of different customers. Because as you know, in technology, everybody's sort of on different points of this continuum of progress. Nobody simply starts from day one. We're 100% deployed in whatever you're going to do.
Right.
It's always a
Yeah.
journey. And there's fear about change. There's this fear as humans. We just we're scared of change. We're comfortable. Right. We like a nice warm bed. How do you what are some techniques that you just sort of help teach people what to listen for when because that's key. You mentioned it before. We're given two ears or 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them appropriately.
Yep.
But the salespeople, we don't.
Yeah, I say that as I stated before, the number one weakness is our ability to listen. Our number two weakness is the ability to ask good questions because we didn't listen.
Right.
So when I work with sales, I say, listen that you have to rephrase what I spoke to in your terms, and then ask if there's anything else that I may have missed. So, speaking of Doug Thompson, hey, Doug, I believe this is what you're telling me. Am I correct, or is there anything else you'd like to add? And that only sounds professional to Doug, but it teaches us that ability to listen. But then it's like, listen to where you can share how whatever you're speaking to benefits them. I have a slide that I use in any type of training I do that says our behaviors are driven by our attitudes, and our attitudes driven by our belief system. And so you want to listen that if you could uncover someone's beliefs, why do you believe that? That's driving your attitude to believe that we're not the product for you, or that you don't need to make change now. Because if I can affect your belief system, then I can really have a result and earn credibility. And that's where stories come in. Stories are really a credibility builder on how you do that. I was working with an organization yesterday, or just on a call with them, because I did a workshop for 56 of their leaders, and we mapped out all of next year. So they were very pleased that they said, let's map out next year. And one of the things, I have 35 years of corporate American experience, 21 years reporting at the C level, meaning to the president or the CEO, which is either good or bad depending on the day. But I tell the story to this group about when I was fired at 20 years old, and how that affected me, but how that made me sit back and say, well, no one ever worked with me on my development. I had no development plan. I knew nothing about the skills gap that I had and how to get there. And I lacked coaching on how to develop my skills to coach people. And that's when I read the book, The 1 Minute Manager. I said, The 1 Minute Manager changed my life. I said, I'm going to start practicing these skills. And when I did, I became successful in each journey, and then learned more from there. Because that book, it starts real simple, saying, if you want to affect someone to grow today, catch them doing something right. So it's like, and then it goes into more things. And it's really a book on that transition from a manager to a leader. And that helped me become where I was just a manager. I wasn't a leader at all, to realize what I needed to do to become a leader. And then it starts opening your eyes on recognizing what you need to do for others. So, and that's where servant leadership comes in. But the person I was speaking to in the group yesterday said, your stories is what people loved, because it made them realize that you went through failures, you went through struggles, but and so that's what helped them to relate, to say that added value. Real quick, I work with the fire department in Florida, and I help with their new recruits on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the firehouse of old was 98% male, all white, and now they want to there's diversity, they want more women, but it's caused conflict in the firehouse. I mean, they live together, and the old style may have had bullying, and they want to just make sure that doesn't happen. They're going to change that by the new recruits knowing what to do, how to be an upstander. But I told a story about way back in 1997 where I was in a meeting with all my employees and I said something very inappropriate, and
Mm-hmm.
how I caught myself, how I apologized and immediately stated that it was wrong, how the person who it was about, I pulled aside later with a manager in the room, apologized, addressed, made sure they were okay. And I let them know that I was going to document the conversation and send it to human resources. I said, because I had to hold myself accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, but the big thing I was teaching is, one, we are human, we will make errors, but how quickly we respond to that too, we can earn back that credibility. My actions had to show that from that point forward. But even showing them that when I sent it to HR was like, wow, you document it yourself? I'm like, yes, I need to, I was incorrect, and I need to lead by example. And, that provided that value. And that's why when I do coaching, and I work with a lot of leaders in workshops, that's where I earn that credibility.
Right. And you mentioned there's a couple great points in there, is in the fact that we do have to lead by example, because people, they remember how you make them feel, from one thing. And at that point in time, I guess the person that was that you talked to, on one hand, this is, certainly it impacted them emotionally from that standpoint, but the immediate recognition, and being this is a one-time thing, this is out of character for you. These other things, you have the credibility to say, look, I made a mistake, and owning up to that. Too many people try to, well, no, it wasn't a mistake. Or if you look at politicians today, which are the worst examples.
Or I hope it goes away.
Yeah, I hope it goes away. Let's be quiet. Nobody knew anything about it. But I think that makes you different. But it also makes them feel that, because again, life is, if you're not trying to better yourself or do something or challenge yourself, then you're not going to have any failures. You're not going to grow, right? So a part of that growing is failures and learning from it, adjusting, and going on from there. So I think that's a dynamite example of how I was growing.
Right. Well, and one of my books, Doug, is called Leadership Lessons from Mom. I always say my mom was the best leadership coach who chose to be a housewife. And I use examples she was really big on character, but she would teach me that humility is a strength, not a weakness. And so if you look at my website, my first value that I list is humility, because she said, you will make mistakes, but how quickly you own up to them will show people that you're authentic. You can maintain that trust, because you can lose trust so quickly. And I teach that leaders understand that trust is important. They value it and they earn it daily, and they want to maintain it. And there's a book called The Speed of Trust, where it talks that trust is like a bank account. You can make all kinds of deposits, but one withdrawal can wipe it all away. And so it's real important that humility teaches me that I can learn from others, no matter what role they're in, no matter what pecking order, but also that I'm humble enough to recognize my mistakes and own up to them.
Yeah, Stephen Covey has sort of that same thing about the emotional bank account. You got to make deposits in before you can make a withdrawal.
Absolutely.
To do that. And I've in my kids and grandkids, I try to establish that same thing with them. Is you've got to build up that trust. You got to build up that account, because at some point in time you will make a withdrawal, and unfortunately, it's typically larger than you would like. It's not as good as going in. So, what are some of the other moms are? I like Mike Rowe. He has his mother's written a couple books about that. About his mom's a great storyteller too. I love Mike Rowe.
Right.
What are some other lessons that you learned from your mother?
Oh, well, there's so many. I mean, I have a saying. I have 1,000 sayings, and I say they came from my mom. I'm a mama's boy. I was the youngest of 7, and she'd always teach me that bad news does not get better with time. And that, and you can see how that correlates to leadership today. So and reporting to CEOs, believe me, I've had to make some phone calls where I had to live that values. So that bad news, it usually gets found out. And if you're trying to hide it, it doesn't get better with time. It gets worse. So the true test of character of a leader is to realize that. And sometimes you have to bring forth that bad news. She would have funny sayings. One time when I worked with her and my father, and this was after my dad had retired, they bought a market and it was very successful. And but she felt my dad was a drill instructor before I was born, but he always had that mentality that he knew he could intimidate. It was just
Mhm.
natural. And when I would come up with ideas or we would discuss things, she felt that he was squashing my ideas. And she said, "You either need to leave the business or you need to confront your father." Because, and her saying was, the moment that you allow yourself to walk on eggshells, there'll be eggs at every turn. And in
Mhm.
other words, it will only get worse, not better. And it will, I need to learn how to confront things. And so I did confront my father. I tell this story in the book. I met him after work out in the yard on the grass, and he tried to intimidate me when I told him I needed to be heard or I needed to leave. And then he got real quiet, and then he hugged me and he said, "This is the moment I've been waiting for." And I tell in the story that our relationship was never
Mhm.
the same after that. It was better. I had earned a different level of trust with him, and was able to have even more in-depth conversation from that point up until his death. And even at his funeral, he told my siblings, "I trust Mark. He's in control of everything here," and that meant a lot there as well.
Mhm.
And I teach that in leadership, that my mom recognized and great leaders recognize where the people that they're leading need a push in development. And that's where my mom was just so strong.
Yeah. What was he looking for? So you mentioned this was the moment he was waiting for. What was that? What did he have in mind? Because I'm sure he treated your siblings very much the same manner that he did you as a recruit.
Yeah. I mean, he had that old mentality. I think he was wanted me to be strong in my convictions,
Hmm.
and to believe in myself, and that's because believe me, he was very strong in his convictions. I tell stories and I talk about and I teach emotional intelligence and leadership that. And the five components, obviously component number one is, do you know your own emotions? And
Hmm.
component number two is, can you control your own emotions? Well, my dad couldn't. Yeah, he
Yeah.
wore his heart on his sleeve, and he used to yell at me that I was too patient and I needed to explode at people sometimes that yell at him. And so, that wasn't the moment he was waiting for, but he
Yeah.
saw that I was coming into my own, and he
Mhm.
really admired that.
Yeah. And that you could take that and you're firm enough in your convictions to take a stand. And that he could
Absolutely.
respect. I'm sure being in the military that long, that was something that he could respect.
Right. It was absolutely, it earned his trust, earned his respect.
Mhm.
And I really appreciated our relationship I always appreciate our relationship, but
Yeah.
it was just nice on how it grew.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did your mom impact your storytelling? Because it sounds like you learned a lot from her. How did she sort of coach you? Where did you pick up? I mean, was it an active coaching or was it just sort of you
Well,
learned because you were so good at it?
well, I mean, I learned from her, and then I learned from others, and so just her ability to recognize things. She would tell me one time, and it's one thing why I write two of my books are children's books. She had told me, "I want you to never let that little boy grow out of you." And
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, let me understand why. But
Yeah.
understand, she told me this when I was a youth, but she told me this when I was a teenager, and she told me this when I was an adult. So she would always circle back to things in a
Mhm.
way. But she says, when you're a little boy, your dreams, you believe you can accomplish them all. Yeah, whether I want to be a fireman, I want to be a policeman. And she says, some point in life you'll realize that there'll be roadblocks, and it helps diminish your dreams. And I want that little boy to always think that you can accomplish things. And that's why
Yeah.
I wrote my books, because I want to affect youth to have those dreams as well. So the
Yeah.
more I listened to her, I just realized that she had that ability to then relate it to things.
Mhm.
And I even quote in the book some of the things that she said she stole from others. They weren't just hers originally, but then yeah, some of them
Yeah.
were weirdly phrased that they were hers. She. I used to always say, "Mom, what do you want me to be when I grow up?" All kids do.
Yeah.
Well, hey, would you want? Because we think that we're impressing them, and
Yeah.
finally one day she says, look, mijo, so Hispanic
Yeah.
family. She said, uh, whether it's policeman, fireman, these type of
Mhm.
things, I want you to be a good example. So whatever you choose, and whenever you make faults or errors, I want you to own up to them, and I
Mm-hmm.
want you to continue to grow. I want you to seek mentors, so you always know that you want to learn. But when you get mentored, I want you to mentor others, because that's
Yeah.
where the true learning will happen. You will learn more from mentoring others. And she
Yeah.
says, and when I'm in heaven, and you're a good example, and whatever you do, I'll smile down from heaven. And
Oh.
so you could see just that ability that she had.
Yeah. It's that connection you had. And you mentioned two things in there. The first one about, keeping the boy in it. And there's another aspect of that I like to think about is when we're kids, we're not, we're a lot more optimistic, a lot more open to things. We don't have these, as you mentioned earlier, sort of preconceptions or what our beliefs are. Our beliefs are still forming
Correct.
at that point in time. And I think if you can hold on to that, where you don't get so rigid in what this is the truth, right? And it may have been 20 years ago, but it's not necessarily today. But not to compromise your values, but from the ability to sort of, be open to learn new things, right, from new people. I think that
Right.
was one of the things she's probably also talking about.
Well, exactly. In fact, you said a good point, not to compromise your values. I have a book out there, Mission, Vision, Values, that teaches on how it's important for companies. But as individuals, help
Mm-hmm.
define your 5 to 7 values that, you will live by every day of your life,
Mm-hmm.
that you will utilize for examples. And so to always have that young boy in me, I don't need it to compromise. I need it to be a part of my values.
Right.
And as it could be a part of my values, it will affect every decision I make from that point forward. And that's why it's important. In fact,
Yeah.
she was always say that values are what you live by,
Mm-hmm.
principles are what you stand on. And so I teach that in leadership, because you could say your values are trust, ethics,
Yeah.
but if they're not automatic, they're not a principle. And you want them
Yeah.
to become a principle that they're automatic, they're built in instinct, and you don't have to think about them.
Well, going back to that thing where you reported yourself, you were standing on that principle. This is purely a principle of mine, and I need to act on it.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to think about it, right? It was an immediate action.
Right. And it wasn't always easy.
Yeah, no.
It may have been uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but it actually served me better in the long run.
And the second thing is that I find that the best storytellers look for, and they don't try to become somebody else. Because there's one time when I was doing some presentations and stuff like that, I saw this guy. I really loved his style. I tried to be that style. It totally wasn't my style, so I was failing miserably. You got to be,
right.
But you can take bits and pieces of what other people are doing, the stories they tell, sort of the way they may deliver it, and make that your own. Sort of incorporate that. This is my own recipe that I've added a little extra cinnamon or nutmeg or turmeric to. And I think that, and you have demonstrated, you've learned from your mother and all these other people, and you definitely glommed onto that, and you're constantly building that recipe book.
Well, yeah, absolutely. When I teach that, you use other people's stories, but you have to, as you know their stories, look for the key points on how they understood how it benefited whoever they were telling the story,
Mm-hmm.
and how they knew how to deliver it. So it doesn't mean I have to deliver it the same, because
Right.
a different audience, it could be an audience of one or an audience of many,
Yeah.
will have that it will have to change a little bit on how it's delivered, and what impact do you want to have.
Yeah, I call that starting the story with where the listener is.
Absolutely.
Because you have to sort of get to their frame of reference, where they're at, whether it's their experiences in life or what have you. If you don't start there, I find that people are less willing to sort of jump that chasm to where you want to start the story. If you start where they are and you sort of like a guide, you lead them along into where you want them to go. Those are the best things, because you're familiar with it. I understand it. I feel safe in sort of engaging in it.
Right. And you need to have the confidence, but it doesn't mean that every story I ever told was I hit out of the park. And I learned from that. Right. But I think of it one time where I told a story that was not a true story, but I wanted it to draw in the listeners and for them to catch themselves. And it worked really well. If I can tell it real quick, sure. This was like in 2000, 2001. I would travel to Colorado. We had a call center there, and at that time, call centers, we were like, at 8 o'clock, we need you on the phone. So get to work, do what you need to do, get your coffee. But at 8 o'clock, start calling. We measure call time. We want to make sure that we're making that impact. And that call center struggled with that. I would get there, I would see, 8, 10 people were still getting coffee, talking about the football game. And I would speak to the management and they would sell it. It would improve, but then I would see it again. So one time I came in and I had a great relationship with the crew. We enjoyed each other. I would do a lot of trainings there, but I always wanted the leadership, because I couldn't take over the leadership. I needed the leaders to grow in that. But I came in one Monday and it was probably 8:20 and it was a little bit standing around. And I said, hey, why don't we gather everyone together? I'd like to tell you guys this story. And I told him, I said, hey, it's great to be here. I said, you guys won't believe what happened to me this morning. I said, man, I want to get to the office. I really enjoy coming here. I grabbed a taxi instead of renting a car. And on the way here, the Denver airport is about 30 miles away from anything. I said, but on the way here, the taxi cab driver gets off the freeway and I didn't know why. And he stops at a little market and he says, look, I need to run in for cigarettes and coffee. And he kept the meter running, and before I could say anything, and they're like, I said, and then 5-10 minutes later, he comes back, and then he drives me here, and I had to pay the bill and come in, and someone says, you mean he charged you for his time of getting cigarettes and coffee? And the whole room got quiet.
Yeah,
because they're like, he got us.
Yeah.
And that was one. It's like, he got us. I'm like, yeah, exactly. And I said, you don't see the little things that you're doing, but that's just, I'm trying to bring to your attention in a funny way that, you're asking us to pay for you getting cigarettes and coffee, and it, you may think it's just you, but when you look around and eventually it does cost, and right now it's costing the momentum that we want within this call center,
Right.
That story helped, and it helped that leader because I saw that leader starts telling stories as well. So he saw the value of storytelling.
So did that actually happen? Did you actually have to stop and do that, or was that something that you just sort of thought?
That was just a story I thought up. So, sometimes, I don't, not all stories are true, but that was meant to be a funny type, not to be deceptive.
No.
Yeah.
It's to make a point. I use those a lot too. Is it simply you're telling something to illustrate a point rather than how do you paint that picture, right? How do you get them to sort of make that connection? You mentioned that, but I think also you've learned to think in stories as you're trying to have that, because once you think in stories, you see them all around you, right? Once you learn to sort of what that is and how to come up with that concept thing, you see them all around, and just regularly, what's a teachable moment? Is this something that I could, in your case there, it was a travel thing, but to be able to go in and then turn that into a business related type thing, very powerful.
Yeah. Sometimes you need to paint a story. Many times in management and leadership, you can't tell them exactly the why, because it might include somebody, for legal purposes. But if you can learn to paint a story where they're like, okay, I kind of grasp what we're speaking about, it adds a lot of value.
Yeah, it does. Well, Mark, you've obviously shared you've got a lot of experiences and stuff on that. So you mentioned before you're a coach and all that. So tell us a little bit about your coaching business.
Well, it's called Mr. V Consulting, but if you go to markvillareal.com, my coaching business, whether it's one-on-one, working with organizations, like I worked with, different organizations throughout the year, $5 billion organization to a mom and pop organization. Mm-hmm. But, and I do a lot of workshops, leadership means a lot of things, strategic planning and emotional intelligence, but also do sales, everything that sprouts out of that. One organization I worked with 24 of their leaders for a year time frame, but one organization, one state hired me to work with the CIO of the state. So, like I said, it could be from one to many, but I enjoy doing that quite a bit. I give a free 30-minute consultation. I want to make sure people are comfortable. But from my 35 years of experience, I can show someone, hey, here are some outlines of what I do, but everything's customized to that organization. Right. So, and I'm able to do that.
That's a great example of starting the story where they are. What are their special needs? What are their circumstances at the time to do that? And it sounds like you're sort of doing this is mentorship on a different scale, but I'm sure you're taking things out of each engagement. Again, it is a good story. You're collecting things to make the next one with somebody else even better.
Oh, absolutely. The event I did recently in Indianapolis, it was funny, but I stayed at the hotel where the event was, and there was 56 of their leaders. Well, at 5 a.m. that morning, and they're all staying there too. They flew the leaders in. There was a fire alarm at 5 a.m. and it went for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And I utilized that in that training that day because we did an assessment on emotional intelligence, and I talk about left brain. Your left brain, where the amygdala is where you have fear and protection, and and your frontal cortex is for logic and reason. And I said, hey, just so you know, I pulled the fire alarm just for this training session. And they're like, what? I said, so how many of you got out of your room right away saying, oh my God, there's a fire and that? And I said, you might be one of those that are more left brain. Now, how many of you, and how long did it take of those of you that rationalized, it's probably not a fire? I could probably stay longer. Maybe I have time to take a shower. I said, because then you used your logic and reason, maybe to a fault. And they laughed, but I brought it in because then we went through their assessments that assessed us the 5 components of emotional intelligence, and then really broke those down really well.
I love how you tied that event into that. That's again, starting where they are. That was a very fresh event with that. And
Yes.
so you said you just released book number 8, or what? That's your latest book, right?
Yeah. My latest book, number 8, is called A Script for Aspiring Women Leaders, 5 Keys to Success. As I've mentored aspiring women leaders for 25 years. I'm a board member of our Empowering Women, and the 5 Keys to Success is I took what I helped develop over those 25 years and I put it into each of the 5 keys. And we even created a workbook that's 52 pages that they can download for free when they buy the book, and then they download the workbook, which is a fillable PDF, so they don't have to print it out. That takes them through the assessments and the assignments, and we really want to pay it forward for that.
Yeah, and we need more great women leaders. We need great leaders all over, but there's definitely the more diversity that you have, the more diverse experiences and all that you have and perspectives you have, then the better off we'll be as a whole.
Well, it shows women are
Yeah.
50% of the workforce,
Mhm.
but only 10% of what you are at sea level, and of the S&P 1500, 5.1% of the CEOs. Yet statistics show that more diverse organizations with women in leadership perform 16% stronger. So
Yeah.
it shows it's growing, but we're still working in development.
Probably half my managers in my career have been women, and I enjoyed, I learned something from them each time and all on that. So I'm richer for the experience.
Absolutely. I think I work with them. Organizations say, if you can, add them to your leadership team, and because they help bring balanced decision making for the whole team.
Yeah, I know in my house that she's the CEO, and I and I have to break some bad news to the CEO on occasion, but
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
well, Mark, thanks a lot. Reach out, and we'll put in the show notes. We'll put all your contact information. We'll reiterate all that. Mark, you're obviously a master storyteller. If I had to tell your story, it's your mother started you out on this path. You learned from everybody and learned to tell a story. I imagine as the youngest kid, you had to do something to sort of survive, but you did a really great job.
Well, I mean, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to, speaking with anybody, and we'd like to pay it forward, as we say.
I am of the same mind. I'm of the age now that I want to leave this place. I've been gifted a lot of experiences and stuff, and I want to pay it forward. And that's sort of the goal of the podcast, is to help people become better storytellers. So, Mark, thanks a lot again. I look forward to book number 9, no matter what it is. I'm sure you got another one in there soon, and I got to go catch up on some older books as well. So, thanks a lot, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me. Take care. Bye.
Bye.